Hi, I'm David King, editor and associate publisher of the Alt Weekly. I'm joined by Luke Stoddard-Nathan, our news editor, and Terence Diggory of the Presbyterian New England Congregational Church. We're here today to talk about sanctuary and ICE's presence in Saratoga and the Capital Region. You're part of a coalition that's addressing the issue and offering sanctuary to folks who might need it, as well as a number of other efforts to make sure that folks feel comfortable and welcome in the city. So can you tell us a little bit about how this effort started?
Well, the sanctuary effort began within the congregation that you mentioned in Saratoga Springs that I'm a member of. We wanted to examine what we could do in support of our immigrant neighbors. It was very clear from the rhetoric of the last presidential campaign that immigration and immigration enforcement was going to continue to be a major issue. And we were concerned with the way in which that issue was being framed in ways that seemed to really dehumanize immigrants. And so we began to have a conversation within the congregation about what we might do, and eventually we evolved what we called a covenant for welcoming immigrants, and that included a commitment to offering sanctuary residence, but it included a number of other things as well in terms of offering support to immigrants in the community. So that was approved by the congregation in May of 2017, and just about the same time, another congregation, the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Saratoga Springs, also made a commitment to sanctuary, and that became the beginning of a partnership and eventually the development of what we now call the Saratoga Immigration Coalition.
So May 2017 obviously coincided with a lot of ICE movement actions. What was your first sort of introduction to the way ICE was going to behave in Saratoga, their arrests and their...
Well, it was the announcement of those arrests.
Right.
ICE says they don't do raids, but to the public eye, they certainly looked like raids. That is, there were a number of people in three separate incidents. A total of 35 people were taken into custody, and in many cases, these were people being taken off the street. That is, questioned and then brought into detention. So. I think that was a major wake-up call for the community about how the community would be affected by immigration enforcement, and the fact that it was being done in this way, I think, was disturbing to a lot of people. It looked like quasi-military actions taking place on the streets of Saratoga.
So. Just for folks who don't quite understand Saratoga or aren't completely familiar besides the track, it is a quieter town during the off months, but you do have a restaurant a number of restaurants that employ immigrants, as well as farms in the area. And then obviously track season starts and you have the backstretch where a number of workers come in who are immigrants and, they live in this sort of ramshackle conglomeration of structures. How do you stay in touch and reach out to these folks? How do you let them know that you're available?
Well, the Saratoga Immigration Coalition and the folks at our church are basically volunteers. We're looking for learning from the professionals how to help out, and the professionals are service providers of various agencies. So, for instance, the Saratoga County EOC, the Economic Opportunity Council, has a Latino advocacy program, and so they work with immigrant population in our area. At the racetrack, there's an organization called BEST, which stands for Backstretch Employees Support Team, and they are actually under contract with the New York Racing Association to meet the needs of the backstretch workers. So we're also working with them in the more rural areas of the region there's a agency called Migrant Education Outreach, and they're working with families on farms in the area. And so we're also getting information from them. So each of the meetings, we held monthly meetings for the Saratoga Immigration Coalition, and each of those meetings we try to put at the very front of the agenda a report from the service providers, so that we're hearing as directly as possible from the immigrant community. What are they feeling? What are their needs? And then we can go on from there to think about how we can meet them.
And what was your? We heard a lot last year about people not coming for jobs, not being able to fill backstretch jobs, and there seemed to be some contention about that. What was your take on the level of fear and amongst the immigrant community?
Well, I think the level of fear was high. It tends to go up and down in relationship to recent enforcement actions, or even just the sense of the presence of ICE in the community. That is, if vehicles that are identified with ICE are spotted, that will raise the level of fear. We were told by a number of the service providers that we work with that the workers at the track, for instance, were very reluctant to come off-site into downtown Saratoga. We've been told by people who offer English language training that immigrants who are interested in having that training are at the same time reluctant to come to classes because they feel that any place where an immigrant population is known to gather might be suspect and the target of an enforcement action. So it has the fear level has affected the ability to support immigrants in a number of ways. So, I mean, we should be clear that from the reports I've heard, that immigrants, both with documentation and without, are sort of feel like they're in the same situation because they're not interested in tangling with ICE or being a part of these raids. And I think we've seen that ICE has adopted some techniques now that aren't part of the norm of previous administrations, whether it is arresting someone at a hearing. Well, they're certainly being much more aggressive than under previous administrations. So, how do you? I mean, how do you make sure that you're providing what's necessary in this case to both populations? Well, in terms of enforcement action, one major effort is just to do Know Your Rights education. That is to let all immigrants, and as you say, this affects undocumented and documented immigrants, people who have legal papers for being in the country. They're also afraid about being stopped by ICE, and so we want to make sure that people know what their rights are in terms of what questions they have to answer, which is basically none. They don't have to answer questions, and if they are taken into detention, what rights they have to go forward from that, including the right to have legal representation, the right not to sign anything that they're asked to sign until they consult with an attorney. So that's a major step in terms of dealing with the enforcement actions themselves.
And folks in Albany sort of, I think, are very familiar with this concept of being a sanctuary city. Saratoga isn't, and I know that the politics there are quite different. What was the response from the? I know the mayor was involved initially, but what is it? How has the government been involved? Have they been helpful? I certainly a number of folks have been outspoken about the impact on the city, but.
Right.
from your perspective?
Well, Saratoga, as you say, is a complex community in terms of the relation of law enforcement to ICE. Although Saratoga Springs has not officially declared itself to be a sanctuary city, the police chief has on record a policy that his agency is observing, which is very close to what sanctuary city policies will often include. So the main thing, obviously, is not volunteering information about the immigrant population to immigration enforcement. If somebody is stopped for, let's say, a traffic infraction, it stops there. The police are interested in that particular incident, but they're not going to investigate further what that person's status is. So that's the Saratoga Springs police policy. The Saratoga County Sheriff, on the other hand, will admit that he is much more open to cooperating with ICE. Members of the Saratoga Immigration Coalition have met both with the police chief of Saratoga Springs as well as the Commissioner of Public Safety in Saratoga Springs and also with the county sheriff, and those conversations have gone very differently. Yeah. But at least we're having a dialogue in each case, and they all know that citizens in the community are concerned with public safety issues, but we have, I think, different ideas about what best serves public safety. So
you've mentioned that right now folks are focused more on what's going on in the Albany County Jail. There isn't a ton of ICE action right now, and we're heading into track season when, last year obviously it calmed down. There weren't major raids during the season. What can people do to get involved and help the 309 folks now that are being held there?
The number varies day by day, right? A major organization that is coordinating efforts to support the people who are coming into detention at Albany County Jail is the Legal Project, and they have put out a call to attorneys, not necessarily immigration attorneys, because they're willing to offer the training that's necessary to interview detainees in the jail, and translators of Spanish, but many other languages as well. And that effort to recruit and train volunteers is a ongoing effort. I think the other thing that we need to do is just listen for further calls. Those of us who don't fall into one of those two categories, we're not an attorney and we don't have the language skills to serve as an interpreter. We can, for instance, contribute funds. Immigrants who are in detention, they can actually have an account that allows them just to purchase, daily needs while they're in prison, and there is an appeal to supply money to that fund, again channeled through the Legal Project. I recently heard of a interest in getting paperback dictionaries donated so that the dictionaries can go into the hands of the detainees and they can help themselves prepare for the interviews that they'll be having with the attorneys. So there are a variety of things like that people can do. I think the main thing is plug into one of these volunteer networks and listen for the appeals as they get transmitted.
I'm wondering, since May of 2017, given the work you're doing in the neighborhood, have you watched public sentiment change? Have you met people who have said, I wasn't really paying attention to this, and now I'm starting to care more? Has there been a change in public sentiment around ICE and around undocumented immigrants in the Saratoga Springs area?
Well, I think the sentiment remains complex, and there are, every time there's an article posted about a sanctuary effort or a demonstration that is supportive of immigrants, somebody will post a protest, a counter protest, and say these people are illegal and they're a threat to security and so on. So we continue to get mixed opinion, but I would say in general there has been a growth. I would say perhaps not so much a growth of awareness, because I think with the election of Donald Trump, awareness was already aroused. But I think what's increasing is the eagerness of people to do something. They want to know, so how can I help out? What can I do? Even if it simply means, walking down the sidewalk holding a sign at a demonstration. I want to find out what I can do, and that certainly has been increasing.
Did you see a spike of interest after the family separations? Have you seen a shift?
Well, yeah. I mean, there were rallies. I mean, just in terms of the local area, there were rallies in Albany, Saratoga Springs, Glens Falls, and I think each of those rallies drew more people than similar rallies for similar causes in the past. I think the family separation issue had such an emotional pull to it that it really brought energized a lot of people to say, this is intolerable. I need to do something. I think what people need to recognize is that it's obviously true that was an immediate crisis, and it was a gut-wrenching issue, but that kind of thing has been going on for a while. I mean, there are families, when ICE picks up somebody from the street in our area, very often that means family separation, because that individual is going to be taken away very often from family members that he or she has been supporting.
Yeah.
So that is going on. It's going to continue to go on, and I just hope that those people who have been energized by the Families Belong Together concern will be able to keep that momentum and keep that concern going, because we're in this for the long haul. It's going to be a while. Obviously, the way Congress is acting, the road to immigration reform legislatively is a very long uphill battle.
So how should folks reach out to you, or what can they do to get involved in the movement in Saratoga?
Well, the Saratoga Immigration Coalition has a Facebook page, so you can, if you're a Facebooker, you can look us up on Facebook, leave a message at the page, and we will pick up on that. Our church, the Presbyterian New England Congregational Church, has a office where you can call and leave a message there as well. For the Capital District as a whole, especially for those who would like to in some way support the legal project, the email address for that is for the Capital Region Immigration Coalition, which is abbreviated CRIC, or CRIC, and people can email cric@legalproject.org, and just let the folks on that end know that they're interested in helping out, and they'll hear back from somebody.
I mean, I know a number of folks who have been involved in volunteering, and it does seem like there's a rapid response. Folks get the dictionaries or the number of volunteers very quickly, but it's a matter of there's so many people that getting to them and making sure they get the information they need is really the struggle.
Right. Yeah. So the number of volunteers is swelling, and that itself is posing coordination challenges. So people should be patient if they don't hear right away, but they can be sure that and especially if they're persistent, they'll hear from somebody and they'll find a way to plug into the actions that are ongoing.
Well, thank you so much for coming today, and really, thank you for being so open. And I expect we'll be talking to you again soon as things continue to play out over the summer in Saratoga.
Thank you for the opportunity.